The Brazilian Congress has finally approved a tax reform after decades of discussions. Boiled down, the reform merges multiple consumption taxes into two VAT-like levies, one at the local level and one at the federal level. It is by far the most consequential piece of legislation discussed in Congress this year, and it will have a massive impact on the Brazilian economy as a whole. My name is Gustavo Ribeiro, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report. This is Explaining Brazil. If you like Explaining Brazil, you should subscribe to the Brazilian Report, the journalistic engine behind this podcast. We are an independent organization funded by subscribers, and you can help us stay independent and continue producing award-winning journalism. And if you are already a subscriber, you can go the extra mile and join our Buy Me a Coffee fan page. In return, you can get exclusive perks like special newsletters and behind-the-scenes content, as well as a shout-out here on our podcast. Today, I'd like to thank our Buy Me a Coffee members, Carson Allen, Gabriel Luca, Andrei Novoseltsev, Pen Ludwig, Leslie Seal, Mark Hillary, Luis Hans, Erwin Menes, Aaron Berger, Kars Vresvik, Alasdair Townsend, Miller Renascido, Peter Abrahamson, Jim Awofadeju, David Dixon, Jose Rosi Stankovic, Emerging Market Muser, Anna Lund, Peter Suffering, Anderson da Silva, and someone who chose to remain anonymous. And our Buy Me a Coffee members come from all over the world, so please, if we are butchering the pronunciation of your name, do send us an email. And if you too believe in the importance of independent journalism and want to hear your name on our podcast, go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report and subscribe to one of the membership tiers. Click on buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report to learn more. An average of 35 new tax rules are written daily in Brazil, making the effort of learning them all, let alone how to apply them, an inglorious and almost impossible task. It is not uncommon for those who pay taxes in Brazil not to know exactly what they're paying, and those who collect the taxes not to know what they are collecting. Even so, Brazil's Federal Revenue Service is ruthless, and it is nicknamed the Lion for its aggressiveness in finding possible collection errors. Brazil has several tax regimes at the federal, state, and municipal levels, which often overlap. The country's notorious bureaucracy increases the cost of doing business in Brazil and stifles innovation. According to 2019 World Bank data, it takes an average of 1,500 hours per year, or 187 8-hour workdays, to comply with Brazilian tax laws. But since last Friday, the hopes of making this madhouse a saner tax environment have come true. The House approved legislation reforming the tax code. And to discuss these changes, we invited Sergio Lima, a senior analyst at Medley Global Advisors and a columnist at the Brazilian Report. Mario, thanks for being here.
Hi, Gustavo. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So, how old are you, Mario?
I'm 40 years old.
And how old were you the first time you heard that Brazil's tax code needed reform?
Wow. I think people are saying that it was 30 years in the making. What I can tell you is that I have colleagues, journalists here in Brazil, in Brasilia, that they said that they managed to get married and put their children from from preschool to grad school, all covering the failed attempts of tax reform. So it has been a while in the making.
And I know we say that a lot, but just how Byzantine is the Brazilian tax code? Can you give us an example?
First of all, you have a system that's it was made to be confusing because you have state, you have municipal, and you have federal taxes, and a lot of those taxes they have you use to define its own tax bracket. You use other taxes as a way of calculating these other tax brackets. You have situations in which something is produced in one state, and as soon as it moves to another state, you have a huge tax premia for another state, but at the same time, you can collect tax credits from federal taxes when you do things. So it's like a complete chaos in which a lot of these times it's being argued in courts, either by companies that feel they have been overcharged against the government, or the government against the company because the government feels like they have been evading a lot of taxes, or even companies disputing against themselves. So it is a chaotic mess. You can say that there's some people who say that you waste, company wastes sometimes more than 1,000 hours a year just to pay taxes. So it is a burden for the companies as it is. So a tax reform that just simplifies the system, just by virtue of making it simple, even if it's an imperfect reform, it will generate some gains in terms of activity and productivity for Brazil.
So what are the main points of this reform that Congress passed on Friday?
Well, the base of the reform is you're making it all the states and municipality taxes into one VAT system, which is value added tax system, and so in Brazil you have a dual VAT because the federal taxes are also being put together into a federal VAT. So the system, the value-added tax system, it's what basically almost every country uses as their own tax system. So not only it will be the system will be way more simple for the companies that are already in Brazil, that will probably not waste a lot of hours and especially money for paying taxes, but also you will have a system that is more easily understandable and with less red tape when you're looking at it from a foreign investor's perspective. So in that sense, you have this kind of gain, even if it's just by virtue of a more comparable system than what we have at this moment.
Now, the reform, to be clear, is about simplifying the system, not reducing the tax burden, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing which is a very important discussion. No, it's not. It's not going to reduce tax burden. It may reduce the burden of paying taxes, but not the tax burden. So because basically you're not removing the sources of income which are going to be taxed. You're just removing this kind of asymmetry in the system in which you have several taxes, but overall, the government is expecting that it will be like that there will be a zero fiscal impact in this reform, in the sense that you will be charging the same tax burden that as you do now. It's just going to be way more clear for people how much tax they are paying as it is.
And you mentioned that this is the tax reform that was possible, but not a perfect tax reform. And I mean, it is understandable because changing a tax code is never an easy thing, as it touches on the privileges of powerful groups. And I mean, this past few months, we have seen multiple sectors trying to get special treatment in the new system. Do you think Congress created too many exceptions to the rule?
Well, in terms of, if we're looking at this from an economic perspective, yes, they created a lot of exceptions. Which every exception that is created, it worsens the system because you remove some of the simplification for the overall system, and what is most glaring is that when it's basic mathematics. So if you give some exemptions, some benefits to some areas, you're basically saying that the overall public will need to compensate this. So, and this will be seen when those tax brackets are finally set in the system. You will see that the overall bracket will be higher than what the government initially expected and proposed, which was around the 25% tax brackets. So it's going to be higher because you need to compensate for the areas which are not going to be taxed the same. But at the same time, so I mean, this is basically like a subproduct of lobbies, sector lobbies, and some very powerful lobbies like the Rural Caucus in the Congress, which generated a lot of exceptions for agribusiness. But at the same time, you need to understand that it's better to have a change, even if it's not perfect and far from it, than the system that we have right now. So if we consider that the system we have right now is the Frankenstein monster, I think what was approved, if it's not like the belle of the ball, at least is somewhat presentable. So I mean, it's not as complicated and as it was. So it's a gain nonetheless.
You talked about the future VAT tax rate, which will be defined in the transition to the new system. And you also mentioned that the government wished to keep it at around 25%. Now the finance ministry forces it at 27.5%, which would make it one of the highest, if not the highest in the world. But do you think it can get even higher than that?
I think it's possible because the final calculations after all the exceptions will have to be made, and you have the some subsequential bills that are going to be voted next year, which are not constitutional amendments, but are bills that are going to make it like regularize the full system that passed it. So you need to have some bills to actually set those limits and brackets, and how it's going to be, how it's going to affect the companies, and how the people are going to pay for the taxes. So it can be higher than 27.5, but this difference from what I said, the 25 that I mentioned, which was the what government calculated for their initial proposal, to 27.5, it's basically like this is the premium that everybody's going to have to pay to accommodate for the exceptions.
Now, the reform passed on December 15th, and I mean, talk about passing consequential legislation at the 11th hour. How important was it for the government to get the reform approved before the end of 2023?
Not only it's important because you can already start like the second phase, which I mentioned, like the bills that are going to really regularized what was passed. Not only it's earlier than that. You have the government can deliver a costly and very hard to deliver reform, which it's a flagship reform in terms of political for the politicians involved in it, not only the government, but you can clearly mention the head of the lower house speaker, Arthur Lira, who really worked to get this thing approved. In a smaller scale, you can mention the Senate and Congress president, also Rodrigo Pacheco. So it's a flagship for each one of them. It removes a very tricky discussion from an election year, which is we're going to have municipal elections next year. And for the government, it's also important because as soon as you pass this year, there's one less piece of legislation that the lawmakers can use to extract some sort of pork barreling next year when, like I mentioned, municipal elections, they are eager to get as much money as they can for their constituencies. So it's you remove one obstacle for next year in which they could you can say that they could sell they can increase the price of their votes. So it's also for a in a political standpoint, it's also important for the government to do this year, even if it was on the almost at the end of the year. It's better than having to wait for next year, and also for the investors looking at this as an perspective of investments. People can be look and say, okay, we remove this uncertainty, so now we can have a better outlook when we're planning on putting funds into Brazilian economy.
Now, talking about the investor perspective, it is important to remember that markets were freaking out when Lula won and when he named Fernando Haddad as his finance minister. The Lula administration did not create this reform, but made it one of its key policy goals for the year. I mean, the government chose Bernard Api, the main author of a reform proposal, to be its tax reform secretary, and the government also put its political weight behind the proposal. How much of a win is this for the government vis-a-vis local investors who still frown upon Lula and his team?
Well, I think there's an ideological malaise in local investors regarding this government, either because it's a left-wing government or because it hails from a party that even if Lula, in his first two tenures, he was a more pragmatic in terms of economy, his successor was really step the foot on the gas of public spending to an unsustainable level, which created the worst economic downturn in 2 years that Brazil had in 2015 and 16. So there's like I said, there is an ideological prejudice, but also it was not just like, there is also the fact that is that the party had a lot of miscarriages in the economy. So it's mismanagement better than miscarriage. They had a mismanagement of the economy. So there was a sentiment that this could happen all over again. The fact that they passed this legislation, when you look at the investor's perspective, it's good for two reasons. Not just because it's going to make the system better and thus can increase the likelihood of investments and increase the productivity of the economy. But I think what's important when you look at this is that, one, this is a government that having said everything that Lula says against the market, they can still be pragmatic and deliver on reforms, and especially they have the political muscles to actually pass legislation, which when you look at the from an investor perspective, you need a government that's somewhat functional. So they need to have proposals and they need to pass those proposals at Congress. So if this is just a stalemate between the government and the Congress, it would be bad from when you're looking at this from an investor perspective. But at the same time, you kind of are in the best of the both worlds when the government has enough strength to pass some economic measures, but at the same time they do not have enough strength to pass the measures that would be seen, the investors would be frowning upon. So maybe it's like because the Congress is very fragmented and mostly conservatively tilted. So I think it's a win-win situation when you look at an investor's perspective, and those reforms kind of going to that direction.
So would passing the tax reform be a good omen for the government's relationship with Congress come 2024?
Well, I think that's probably going to be the same moving forward. Because it's like I said, it's a fragmented Congress with a very defined, even if it's not like the majority of it, it is a Congress. The bias in the Congress, it's really to the right, while the government is a left-wing government. So it's going to be a discussion of bill by bill, I think so, which in a sense, it's not that bad, even if the government, because even a Congress that was mostly conservative, but not as much as this one, was also a deterrent into a lot of very authoritarian moves from the previous government. So by all means, you can see some sort of balance of powers, which is good when you from every perspective. But at the same time, playing devil's advocate here, it makes it very, very expensive to rule the country in Brazil, and the Congress has been gaining a lot of powers, which if we're trying to look at them from a longer for the long term, I think there is a risk that this Congress may be too powerful to the point that we tend to vote for the president in Brazil. The presidential system makes it that the majority of the population choose one leader, but this leader doesn't have enough support to actually go through with important legislation. So it's almost like we have a parliamentary system without having one, which I don't think it's very difficult for the Brazilian people and the way that we vote in elections to understand that this is the way things are going. So it has a positive side, but it has a downside, which I think it may become harder for anybody to actually pass an agenda moving forward.
And we will certainly keep a close eye on that for the next year. Mario, thank you very much, and happy holidays to you and your family.
Okay, thank you. Happy holidays, and let's hope to have a great 2024, all of us.
Mário Sergio Lima is a senior Brazil analyst at Medley Global Advisors. He also writes op-eds for the Brazilian Report. You can follow his work on Brazilian.report. And I'd like to thank our listeners for following us in 2023. Explaining Brazil will take a few weeks off, but we will be back in January 2024. However, you can still follow what's going on in Brazil and Latin America, as we will continue to publish original content every day on Brazilian.report. Happy holidays, everyone, and Happy New Year!